speaking my truth has made me a louder voice. And that's not always been easy. But I think to answer your question, by getting closer to my own belief system and continuing to explore the evolution of my own ideas, I think that that naturally brings in a larger and more engaged audience.
Welcome back to Connected Conversations. I'm Bob Muscachetti. We are in the throes of the second half of season 4, and this guest is one that I've been dying to have on the podcast. He's somebody who's very well known in the industry, and I have all kinds of questions for him. I'm talking about none other than David Cairns from CBRE.
CBRE.
He's here with us today. David, how are you?
I'm good. You know, I thought you were going to say I have all kinds of respect for this guy, but you said I have all kinds of questions.
I have all kinds of questions for both.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's an honest pleasure. I love so many of the people that you've had on previously, so it's an honor.
Okay, you may have heard me pause there when I say you're from CBRE. It's because you have such a brand that you've built. And there was a part of me that thought you didn't exist in the real world. I swear to God, I thought you were AI. I thought you were AI and that a cartoon image was going to show up and maybe Dave Cairns only existed in the metaverse.
Well, the funny thing is I actually am one of the only people in our industry who is foraying into the metaverse. But no, I am a real person. People in the industry have met me and can vouch for the fact that I'm real.
I never met you. Everywhere I went, Dave, everywhere I went, you got to have Dave on your podcast. You know, Dave, you got to have Dave on your podcast. Tracy Hawkins, you know, talked all about you. Simon Davis, obviously, Chris, all our mutual friends. And I was like, I've never seen this guy. I've never come across him anywhere, and I've never met him in IRL.
Well, look, this would be a fancy avatar if it was real. I got a fake tattoo from my daughter this morning here and here, and then I got a real tiger right here.
Hell yeah.
If AI could do that, I mean, we are along. I would have thought.
So why don't you do us a favor, not just for me, but for our audience who may not have the pleasure of meeting you before, take us through your background, buddy.
Yeah, sure. Well, in the present day, I guess I'm having an identity crisis because I feel like I'm a future of work and living content creator who moonlights as a real estate broker. Yeah. That's how I make my living. But
that's why I paused when I said from CBRE, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll start you at the beginning because I've been able to synthesize my own story a lot through this pandemic. So to take you back far enough, in high school, I was a competitive ski racer, and I really, you know, I kind of fell into that just because my family liked skiing. It was, you know, it's just one of those things where like whatever your family does, you're doing too. But I found my own enjoyment out of that sport. And I think the thing that I ended up liking a lot about it was the purity of how black and white competitive ski racing is. Like the time is the time. You know what I mean? Like
it's a zero-sum game.
It's a zero-sum game. And honestly, like without going into a lot of like personal details about my life, like I had a lot of traumatic stuff going on in my life. And I think that the purity of that black and white sport was this place where I could go to feel safe, actually, which is interesting. But then I never was good enough at it to go pro with it. I did compete until about 17 at a pretty high level, but I had to kind of like hang it up because it's an expensive sport and you have to be, you know, really, if you're going to make an investment in it, like you could go another 4 or 5 years pouring 6 figures a year into the sport and then maybe not even make it, you know? So, yeah. So I quit, and in quitting, I had this lull of this, like, what I also really liked about the skiing was I loved training with a team, but competing individually. Yeah. That was a really interesting juxtaposition, you know, like we'd have this camaraderie and like we would help each other get better. And then when it came to race day, we would go up against each other, just like we would anyone else from other ski clubs. So that was this void for me. And it happened to coincide in Canada in Canada, there was an NHL hockey lockout. But what ended up happening is that a lot of people in Canada jumped on the poker bandwagon at that time because ESPN was covering the World Series of Poker. Chris Moneymaker, this accountant from Nashville, Tennessee, qualifies for the main event with a $30 satellite, parlays it into 10 grand, and then wins the whole thing for 2.5 million, right? And then it has the name Moneymaker of all things, right? It was just like a dream come true for the poker industry to be able to market this guy. So that was all happening at that time, and I fell in love with poker, and that started to fill this void for me of the individual competition that I was missing, right? And so at first I was just organizing home games with my friends. I was the one spearheading those efforts, right? Like we'd get together, play $5 sit and go tournaments.
All this, keep going. I did the same thing.
Okay. So to fast forward, once I got to college, I had the ability to just like go all in on poker, which was something that I had a hard time doing. First of all, legally, I couldn't do it. You know, I wasn't of legal age in high school. I became of legal age. And then I didn't have anybody looking over my shoulder. So I kind of like had fits and starts as a poker player. But by the time I got into my fourth year of college, I won a tournament actually for $270,000 that had around 8,000 players, I think, in it. It was an online tournament.
Yeah.
And it just kind of like set me up to not have to go down the conventional job path.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it because all my friends that were graduating from college at the time had these identity crises going on. Like, do I go work at a bank, a consulting firm? Do I go to a startup? I don't know if I really even feel like an adult. Like, how do I do this? Right. And for me, I just felt this like clarity that I was just going to go pursue poker. And so I was smart enough to know that I didn't want to do poker for the rest of my life. And so I said, okay, if I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, like, what do I want to achieve out of this? And I said to myself, I think I want to achieve two things. I want to get the experience of being able to compete at the highest levels that this game has to offer, or at least near the top. Maybe not the top, but near the top. Mm-hmm. And I also would love the chance to be able to make a huge amount of money, but I don't have the bankroll to take those risks. And so that led me down the path of getting a financial investor. And I could go into great detail on all that, but I'll skip it. Got an investor, and he gave me the ability to play any event I wanted to play in the world up to $10,000 buy-ins. Mm-hmm. He fronted the cash for it, online or in person. And it was quite a journey. I spent the next 4 years of my life playing poker professionally, traveling to Europe, traveling to Vegas, playing a lot online. And it shaped me in a big way. Then in 2011, the Department of Justice in the U.S. indicted the two largest online poker websites for tax evasion, money laundering, wire fraud.
Which one was it? It was Full Tilt.
Full Tilt and Poker Stars.
I played on both those.
There you go. There you go. So yeah, Full Tilt and Poker Stars got indicted, and they called that day Black Friday in the poker world.
I remember.
Yeah, and it was an inflection point, really not too dissimilar to the COVID experience that we've all gone through, right? Where you kind of like look around and you go, where am I going next? Like, this is a fork in the road. I have a decision to make, right? So in poker, the games got materially smaller in terms of the prize pools that were available or the size of the games, and the player pool became stronger because the US, just like in every sphere of our economy, is the largest market. And in the poker context, sure, some of the best players in the world were from the United States, but a huge amount of the worst players in the world were from the United States, right? So it just made the games materially more difficult to beat. And at that time, I said to myself, you know, I'm already kind of not feeling this lifestyle anymore. There's a lot that's unhealthy about it. I think that I should look at this as my time, nod from the universe, look at what to do next. Yeah. And so I was 25 at the time. I had a lot of money in my pocket, but not a lot of confidence as a person to go out into the world and exist within the normal realms of society.
Wait, why is that? Is because you were doing something that was not considered a typical job or why would you feel that way after everything you'd been through?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that everyone can go through these moments where you feel that the skills that you have are not transferable, or that you'll be judged for like,
oh, he's just a poker player.
Yeah, exactly. He's just a poker player or whatever, right? It was, and And it was intimidating to go into like big downtown office buildings and apply for jobs, right? And now you can do a lot of that even remotely. But I was like 25, putting on a suit, which I'd never done, and meeting with like the CEO of JLL Canada or CBRE or whatever, and telling them like why they should hire me. So to sort of back up for 1 second, like
Sure.
I had two paths that like I didn't really know what to do. I was pretty lost. And so I had friends and family that were all trying to help me out. They all kind of encouraged me, like, try interviewing in real estate or insurance. The insurance people like shooed me out the door real fast, which is kind of weird because like poker is a game of risk calculation and assessment, which is exactly what insurance is about. But I think that they perceive the poker player, persona to be negative because it's
So
meant
they
to be.
reinforced that insecurity in you.
Yep, yep. And then I had friends and family actually in the real estate industry,
Okay.
and they looked at me a lot more fondly. I think that especially in brokerage, they were like, okay, this guy's actually used to not earning a salary. I kind of like would laugh at that question. They'd be like, so are you like okay with not earning a salary? I'm like, man, I wake up 85% of the days I wake up, I lose money. And the other 15%, I'm hoping to make it back plus some profit. So like, yeah, if I can go home like neutral at the end of the day, that feels okay to me. Yeah. So
Now,
yeah,
did you start to feel reinforced at that point? Like when you started to have those positive conversations?
not really, no. And yeah, let me try to break it down. So like I was fortunate to get a job at CBRE. I'll always look back on that and be like, thank God. Because I had an offer from a different brokerage that just wasn't right for me. It was more salary, but the opportunity would have been way less. Like I can say nothing but positive things about the CBRE platform. It's just an incredible place to grow your career if you want to do it in real estate. That I will say for sure.
They're one of our
Um,
largest partners, and the majority of my friends work there. Carry on.
yeah, no, it's a great place. So I just kind of went and begged them for a job. I said, look, I have another offer. Like, I know that you don't really have one necessarily for me right now, but like, I don't want to work anywhere but this company. I can see that it's going to give me the best chance to succeed. So at least I had the confidence to do that. I faced the fear, in other words. I felt super insecure. But anyway, then when you get into CBRE, they put you in a sales training program where you basically become a sales assistant to people on the leasing floor. And you're helping them prepare like marketing packages, getting them general research and data, and like delivering wine bottles, like whatever anybody needs. You're doing that for like a year. And I'll never forget having to pull together a PowerPoint presentation for an options package for a tour for one of my brokers that I was helping out. And it nearly sent me into a panic attack because I didn't know how to do it. Like, it might seem silly, Bob, but like I'd never really had to use PowerPoint at that point in my life, at least for a really long time. And to be told to do something well on short notice, and you really want to impress the people that you're working with, and to be under fluorescent lighting in an office, which you've never been in like ever, because it was my first real job, it was really daunting. Like I can't even, I'll never forget like going home and telling my wife, like, I don't think I can do this, which is crazy because I was competing in poker tournaments that were $10,000 just to enter and making like really, really high intense decisions for huge amounts of money. But and then that's the other thing too, right? Is
Do you think it was the structure? Like
oh,
the fact that you're in some type of structured environment where you felt kind of exposed a little bit and like eyes were on you? Because again, what you were doing is way more intense in the poker rooms.
I think you're dead right about that. I think that I've recently been wondering, do I have ADHD? Because what's
I
that?
I definitely do.
Yeah, I think I do. And whether I do or I don't, there's something going on there because I had such a hard time sitting still. I couldn't sit at a desk all day. And in the year that I was doing this assistant job, I remember my manager coming up to me being like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And I'm like, "Okay." And they're like, "You can't just leave for like 2 hours at a time. You can't just like leave the office." And I was like, "Well, why?" And she's like, well, like your job's to be here. And I said, well, does anybody have a problem with the job I'm doing? Like, if you receive complaints about my quality of my work or my availability to the brokers? And she's like, no. And so I said, well, then what's the problem? I don't understand the problem. Like, like what are we talking about? And I was a little bit, I'm able to handle those conversations with more grace today at 36 than I could at 25.
Yeah.
But to your point, Bob, the whole thing just didn't really make a lot of sense to me. The whole idea of like office culture and the hierarchy of the whole thing, I just couldn't really wrap my head around it.
Can I tell you something? For me, I just did what I thought I was supposed to do. My dad was a blue collar guy, right? He worked in a correctional facility, he was a mechanic. He emphasized school, he emphasized, learning in college, and he paid for all that stuff. And I appreciate all that. But then I ended up in corporate America, Dave. I didn't know why I was there. And I did sit at my desk, and I did, I'd go hide whenever I could, extended bathroom breaks or lunch breaks when nobody ever said, hey, you can't go away for this amount of time, because I had a job where I could make it look like I was off doing something.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. Did you ever have that feeling?
I think that maybe because I didn't have the same upbringing that you had, where those values were very much instilled in me as being really important. I ended up, I'm a rebellious person by nature, and I mean, it's a blessing and a curse all at the same time. But I just question authority. I question the way things are being done.
I did question authority in my head. I thought it was all a bunch of BS, but I did what I thought I was supposed to do. Follow.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, which I think is a bunch of BS, which it would have been cool to go off and do something a little different and then find where I felt comfortable.
Well, yeah, I think that's why I wanted to go into brokerage, because I knew that if I did, I'd get the chance to be 100% commission. And once I got there, then nobody could really tell me what to do other than whether I was, making good on my promises to any partners that I had.
So what happened with the PowerPoint?
I screwed it up. I screwed it up bad. And I was standing in the lunchroom, and the guy's like, hey, like, I know you're new to this job, but like, you really blew that. And like, you got to figure this out. Right. And so that really made me feel like crap, because I really care about doing a good job. Like, contrary to the idea that I leave the office for a while and I'm like,
you want to do a good job on your own terms.
Yeah, I really want to do a good job, but just, as you say, on your own terms. So anyway, to kind of like end this up, because I'm sure there's lots of other stuff we want to talk about.
No, I'm loving
it. I ended up becoming an office leasing broker, which I still am today. And I've been doing it now for 11 years. And for the first sort of like 5 or 6, I did it the very traditional way. Like, I did what I was told in that sense, except I started to realize it didn't make sense. Like, people were like, get a stacking plan on Excel, go in a side room, Google the name of the CEO, call them up at 7:30 in the morning before their real day starts, and try to get a meeting with them.
Sure.
And this was sort of like around 2012, 2013. And I was looking around being like, guys, this advice would have made sense when information was scarce and people needed to pick up the phone to get information. But that world is gone. And the people that are giving that advice are the ones that have not had to make a cold call in more than a decade. And so they're giving you stale, bad advice. And so this is where my questioning nature and my like resistance of authority nature comes in. And I'm like, this doesn't work. So the first thing I did was I said, I'm going to go and form partnerships within the ecosystems that I want to do business in. And so I was always a money costing venture that I'd have to go and ask someone in my organization to support me on. I ended up stumbling into a sponsorship with Deloitte for their Technology Fast 50 Awards program. And the cost of the sponsorship was well into the 5 figures. But I was like, guys, like, they're going to put us in the room with 400 CEOs across Canada to interview them for the award. And in part, they're going to tell us what the growth plans are. So like, what better investment of capital could this company make than getting a meeting where the purpose of the meeting is to talk about the growth of the company? And so
relationships.
And build the relationships, of course. And so luckily my company supported me on that. Then I parlayed that into creating a marketing platform that I ended up calling CBRE Forward, where we started showcasing the success stories of Canada's most innovative companies. And what I would do is I had a bit of an equation in my mind. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the Fast 50 meeting. I'm going to put a list together of the companies that are in high growth mode that don't already work with CBRE, because if they do, I'm screwed. I can't go and step on my colleagues' toes. But if they work with one of my competitors and they're going to need a new office within the next 12 to 18 months, I'm going to go promote that company. I'm going to reach out to them and say, hey, I want to tell your story. Like, we want to do a video with you and put it out to the world. And so that was sort of the impetus of that marketing platform. That turned into almost 7 figures of revenue, which was pretty cool. And we invested, like, I don't know, with the Fast 50 sponsorship and the marketing dollars that we put against it, you know, in the time that it generated like high 5 or 6 figures, it couldn't have been more than like 120 grand. So it was a great return on investment.
Sure.
So then I did that. And then in 2019, I was working with a really, really large US company, and they came to us and they said, we think we need 80,000 square feet of office space in Toronto in addition to what we already have. But at the moment, we think we only need like 15. But the market is tight. There's like no vacancy. How can we take what we need now and protect ourselves on what we need going forward? So that was the question that they posed to us. How can we get what we need now and protect what we need in the future without paying rent on it? Yeah. And that was a conundrum for the team that was involved. What we arrived at was the best way to solve this problem was to go to co-working operators first, RFP them, and pick one, and then go to the market with them in tow as a partner in the transaction. And in other words, what we were trying to do is allow the company to take as much space as they needed up front and have someone else who could monetize the space while it wasn't being used, and it could then be called at later dates by that company.
So it was like a sublet?
Well, I think you could think of it more like it was going to go down 2 different ways. Either we were going to separate out the 2 transactions and allow the co-working operator to take the space directly with the landlord themselves that we didn't want. Or we were going to sort of quasi sublet it to them. The transaction actually never happened. But where I'm going with this story is how it changed my mindset. So at the end of the day, however we skinned the cat in terms of doing the deal, we were going to license space from that co-working operator. That was going to be the way that we would structure it. And we would agree to design criteria that would allow that co-working operator to confidently sell that space to the market while we were not using it, right? So that they weren't holding the bag, but that we could each have a symbiotic relationship in this space.
A design concept that could be generic and applicable to many.
Correct. And at the time, the enterprise WeWork model, like the sort of full floor WeWork model, was very popular and had quite a lot of legs. And it took the pandemic for that to kind of fall off a cliff. But at the time, it made a lot of sense. So it was sort of going to be like enterprise floors that could be leasable to somebody else. But anyway, transaction didn't happen because the company just decided they didn't want to grow at that time. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was this light bulb moment where I'm like, if this is how a company is trying to solve their own flexibility problems today, how and when is it going to be the responsibility of the owner of that property to actually fulfill that promise for the customer? Mm-hmm. In other words, like, when are we going to need to evolve beyond like setting it and forgetting it with a traditional lease? So landlords really becoming more like hotel operators. Like, when is that transition going to happen?
Based on demand, basically.
Yeah. And so that just sent me down the road of exploring this co-working sector because it really felt very much part of the future to me. And so since then, I've been working with co-working operators predominantly to try to help them add locations across more than one city, not just Toronto, but in multiple geographies. And I still do some traditional leasing stuff too. But to kind of round out my story, when the pandemic happened, and everybody had to go work remotely, I ended up having a few initial thoughts. The first was, it's the definition of insanity to try to prospect companies right now for office space. Like, I was seeing my colleagues being like, hey, there's never been a better time to do a deal. This is going to pass in a couple months. Like, you should be in the market now for your next space. And I'm like, oh my God, like there's a global pandemic happening right now. And brokers who by our very nature are seen as like shisty are going to appear even more shisty. And I don't want to paint everybody with that brush because there's some incredible people that are brokers, and some of the smartest, most thoughtful, most empathetic people I've ever come into contact with are brokers. But in general, there are also some crappy salespeople in this industry, just like there are in any other industry.
Software industry is loaded.
Right? Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to do that because that feels wrong and it feels insane. And then my other thought was like, oh my God, I didn't realize this, but I closed the door and locked the key on a digitally independent, digitally native guy who actually needed to know how to connect and collaborate on the internet to be successful as a poker player. Because if you wanted to be a poker player and succeed at the game in 2008, 2009, 2010, 11, if you weren't doing it digital first, and you were screwed. And you would see the tension. It's actually very similar to the tension that exists today. You go to a live poker room and you would hear like consummate live pros talking about how online games are rigged, how they're dumb, how it's not real poker, blah, 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 blah. And
Who's
then
that? Phil Hellmuth? Phil Hellmuth.
look, I gotta give that guy credit. He just went ahead as he's holding the most number of World Series poker bracelets by a couple now. He's an interesting character, but he played online. He did play online, but no, it'd be more like these like random old school poker players, right?
Yeah.
But then what ended up happening is that the people that learned poker digitally first ended up becoming the best live players in the world too. And so that's actually almost in a way how I'm looking at this future of work thing. It's like the size of the poker economy exploded because of online poker.
Yep.
Like it exploded. And it not only did it explode online, it exploded in person. It created far more poker stops than you could have ever imagined. Right? And I honestly think the same thing will happen in the future of the office or the future of work. It's just not in any way going to look like what it even looks like today. And the way that it will play out will be far longer because the makeup of a casino didn't need to change to add poker to that casino or to grow a poker tournament. All that happened actually was the online economy fed a need for more real life games. Yeah. But in this situation, we're talking about like a complete reorganization of a really clunky asset class. Mm-hmm. And maybe we need to actually move into new asset classes or definitions of what we think of when we think of this office asset class to actually arrive at the destination that poker ended up at. And so to just close the loop with my story, it's reigniting that guy inside of me that was digitally native has been a blessing and a curse because it sent me down this road of poking holes in all of the structural inefficiencies of not just the office sector, but now like corporate culture in general. And that's a lot of what I talk about online.
Yeah. So that was, I love what you just took us through there. And I mean that. And like, I don't do a ton of research on my guests. A lot of times I know folks who come on the podcast, right? I only knew through our interactions on LinkedIn and other people giving me feedback on you. Full transparency, and this is part of why I wanted to talk to you today. You showed up in my feed like a year ago, maybe, I don't know, or maybe across the pandemic, and you just seemed to come out of nowhere. And I was joking with my colleagues here in the office. Do you know what an industry plant is?
I mean, I assume it's like you almost think like someone's playing a trick or something. Like let's plant this guy in. Like I'm an actor who's here. An
industry plant is somebody who's created by an entity. There's somebody called Bobby Altoff right now, and by no means is this actually a compliment to you because I know you're not an industry plant, but you just kind of exploded into my feed, and maybe I just connected the dots somewhere. And I was consuming your content, and then I started the podcast. And then whenever I talked to somebody, they would say, "You should meet Dave Cairns." Am I saying your last name right, by the way, Cairns?
Cairns is how I pronounce it.
So sorry, I said it wrong a bunch.
It's all good. It's all good.
But I was like, this guy's like an industry. He's so popular on LinkedIn, and he just kind of exploded onto the scene all of a sudden. And maybe it was just to me you exploded onto the scene, like. Where did this all come from? Like, how did you show up in my feed so dramatically? How did that happen? Tell me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if I know. I started
Are you putting out more content or did you, because I did. During the pandemic, I said, I'm going to put out more content. I'm going to try to connect with more people because I'm super disconnected. And I was going through something very personal. I was isolated and I was taking care of my elderly father. And I needed that human interaction. But Dave, you exploded into my feed in a good way to where all I'm seeing is your stuff.
I guess it's like
that.
I guess it's like, yeah, I don't know. I guess it's that like overnight success thing. Like you could talk to colleagues of mine. Like I was making content back in 2017 on LinkedIn.
I was terrified to, Dave. I was terrified to put content out on LinkedIn because I didn't understand the platform, nor was the platform really conducive of that in my world. And I had some interesting managers that they weren't very kind towards me. I was afraid to put a picture out. I was like, I'm going to go on a business trip. I'm going to take a picture of San Francisco. I'm going to say how I'm excited to be here. And that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
So
well, you're really actually tugging on the main string here, which is when I started, I was just going and doing content was scary enough to our industry and people in general, right? And when I started, I was doing things like I used to make videos in a boardroom at CBRE's office in Toronto, talking about things like how do you sublease an office and relocate at the same time without paying rent in two locations? You know, like I was doing like informational tutorial based content. And
very buttoned up.
Yeah. And it worked. And at that time, nobody had any problems with the stuff that I was saying. But I think once the pandemic happened and I felt this internal tension myself, where I monetized my life from the office and I still do. And I think there's good reason to do that. And by no means have I ever said at any time that I think the office is dead. I don't think it is at all. And I never have. Some people have interpreted some of the things I've said that way, but anyone who knows me knows that's never what I've said. But I couldn't help but be a human being. You know what I mean? I couldn't help but recognize that this was a massive opportunity to like level the playing field of work for so many different people, right? Like whether you're disabled, whether you're a care provider, and now you actually can experience the benefit of handling.
That was me, Dave. During the pandemic, I bought a home and I took care of my elderly father.
Yeah, he died, right? I think you mentioned he died. Yeah, and I had seen that, and there you go, right? And like someone who's in that spot, and every season of life is different, and we should reserve the ability to change our minds or be able to do that as our life ebbs and flows. Like I couldn't look at this paradigm in a binary way anymore. It just felt wrong as a human being to look at things that way. And so because that's a decision that I made, I said to myself, what I'm particularly good at, it seems, is exposing the problems and not necessarily always having the answers to them. But I tend to have a willingness to say like, hold on, this doesn't make sense. And so I decided to go down that road and I kept honing my voice in that way. And it has not been easy, Bob. I've had lots of fans and lots of incredible support. And it's brought me closer to some of the people like you've mentioned, like Tracy Hawkins, who like, if I had not gone down the road of like really or honestly putting my thoughts out there and not trying to sell a thing to anybody, I wouldn't have a relationship with Tracy Hawkins right now, right? And that's why I do. But of course, traditionalists in our industry are abound. They're everywhere. And there's an incredible amount of threat here. And speaking my truth has made me a louder voice. And that's not always been easy. But I think to answer your question, by getting closer to my own belief system and continuing to explore the evolution of my own ideas, I think that that naturally brings in a larger and more engaged audience in general.
Dave, I got to stop you because I got goosebumps a couple of times. And you know why I got goosebumps? You helped me realize something just now. I think back to the Bob that felt like he was doing what he's supposed to do, was afraid to maybe put content on LinkedIn. I think back to the Dave who didn't feel like he belonged in the office, who felt kind of restricted by the environment, didn't feel, had imposter syndrome maybe. I think what me and you were doing is setting those past versions of us free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I just sat back, and through your talk track, you made me realize that I did something for myself
Mm-hmm.
over the course of this time. And that's why me and you, even though we don't know each other.
Now I've got him. I don't know if you can see him, but I got him now.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's why me and you gravitated and said, let's do something together, right? And
Mm-hmm.
people kept saying, you two need to talk, you two need to talk, because the two of us have been on similar paths. And I think the current versions of ourselves should be very, very proud and very grateful that we've been able to step away from the past versions of ourselves that felt like we didn't belong, we weren't good enough, or whatever it was. Because
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly been there.
This is a moment in the future of work, regardless of the industry that you're in, that having the ability and the willingness to put your own voice out into the world honestly is not really a nice to have anymore. It's actually a necessity. And I actually want to say something on this podcast I've never said before.
Huh.
I think that if you go on LinkedIn, the largest accounts on LinkedIn are all about solopreneurship. And here's the storyline, and it's a great storyline. And by the way, it's a storyline that I'm not going to lie, one day I wouldn't mind being part of. But here it is. There's a $100,000 plus idea locked inside of your head. And me, the solopreneur, thought leader, or influencer, through my courses or through my, proprietary systems, can help you unlock that idea so that you can spend more time doing what you want, less time doing what you hate, and take a 2-hour lunch with your spouse or take care of your ailing father without worrying about it if that's what you want to do. And that is a great thing to be selling. And I think that today and in the future, there's going to be the opportunity for more and more of those people to exist than ever before. And I'm all for that. But I think that indirectly that alienates a very, very large proportion of the knowledge economy. A bunch of people who either don't feel ready for that, don't feel like it's possible, or don't want it at all. But what they do want is this. They want to be able to go from being employee X at company X to a globally recognized leader. And I'm going to use real estate as the example here. I'm a global leader in the workplace arena who currently lends those services to company X. Or maybe said better, I'm a global thought leader in the future of the workplace for companies 10,000 people or greater. And currently, I am leading those efforts at Company X. That's what they want to be recognized as. And the only way that we're going to get there is if more people like me and you do the hard thing, which is to work at a company and to honestly and openly put out our thoughts and to make it known to our audience and to our employer that we are trying to do this from a good place. We're not trying to, offend anybody.
We're not trying to rage against the machine.
No. We may not have a belief system that aligns with the average person within an organization, but that should be celebrated. We're not living in a world even where traditional education makes that much sense anymore in so many ways. I look at my daughter, who I'm convinced she's neurodiverse. Mm-hmm. She told me before going to school that her favorite thing that she was excited to do was music. And do you want to know what her favorite thing is now? Gym. Something that she never told me she liked really before, because in music, they make her sit down the whole time.
Yeah.
And gym, she gets to move around. She just wants to move around, but she'd love to move around and play music. And so I guess my point is, we are building, the system is set up to be do this in school so that you become a model employee. And then once you're a model employee,
that was me, David.
Once you're a model employee, stay that way, clamp down your authenticity and your organic, real thoughts. Don't share them with the world, because that is scary and could get you fired. We need to create more space for people to be able to openly and honestly share their point of view, because the world that we're moving into is just increasingly uncertain and shifting and changing all the time. It's not some linear trajectory that companies are going to be going through either. And if they clamp down voices or sort of like, what's the word? Like implicitly make it scary to do that, not overtly, but implicitly make it scary for people. They are digging their own graves, whether they realize it or not.
It's part of, I go to conferences, right? And sometimes I wear my polo, I wear my dress slacks, or I'll throw a button down on. But recently, I've started wearing clothes that are more comfortable for me, especially if I'm speaking. I want to feel comfortable. I like to look nice. I don't mind throwing on a suit. But I purposely, at the last conference I went to, I facilitated a panel in a t-shirt. And some people had some things to say about this. And it's like, I'm up there. It doesn't change what's inside my brain. I don't look like a slob. It's not some t-shirt that I pulled out of the hamper. It costs just as much as a button-down shirt, and I look nice in it. And it makes me feel good. And it's like, I don't want to put the button-down shirt on, and it doesn't change what's inside my brain or what I'm trying to do in facilitating that panel. So that's my kind of agreeing with exactly what you said, that just because I'm not dressed in the cookie cutter business casual sort of way, it doesn't change who I am, what I bring to the table, what I bring to my company or industry.
Well, there's a movement that is becoming a groundswell now around what you are describing. And it's not, all you have to do is look outside. Commercial real estate is one of the last standing hyper traditional industries. It's terrified of changing, whether it's the inside of the asset, whether it's the length of the lease, whether it's how we dress. Like there's this inherent fear that if a company such as a big brokerage firm doesn't present itself suited up and buttoned up, and again, like it's changing incrementally, but like me going into an office, like exposing my tattoos, obviously from an employee contract perspective, I can't be fired for having tattoos. But do I feel completely comfortable to be exactly how I want to be inside of a corporate office, inside of the most traditional industry left on the planet? The answer is no. And that is a shame. But I am incrementally gaining that confidence. And I want to give my credit to you because I've watched all of your LinkedIn posts. I've seen you presenting yourself in a way that feels authentic to you and that's comfortable. And what the hell is wrong with being comfortable? Is there anything wrong with that? Like, what on earth is wrong with literally feeling comfortable? But you're one of the people that are doing the important thing. You are willing to do the uncomfortable thing, which is to show up as Bob, however Bob wants to show up. And you're giving people unconsciously permission to do the same thing. And that's what we need. That's what we need.
I appreciate that. So, Dave, before we wrap up here, why don't you take us through what you're doing right now in the metaverse? You have something very interesting going on, and we're gonna end today with that. So, take us through this nice little endeavor you've embarked on in the metaverse.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for asking. So, the metaverse is this weird space right now because everybody thinks it's dead, and a lot of people hate the term metaverse. I think some people who are lay people, let's call it, around what is the metaverse, are worried that if we sort of submit to it, then we will spend all of our time inside of a video game and we'll never be human ever again. That's sort of the person who doesn't understand it.
That's
the person
me.
Okay. That's cool. That's cool. And there's nothing wrong with that belief. I actually have all the time in the world for people who hold that belief. The problem that I have is the ones who've done the research and are arrogant about the knowledge that they've obtained.
That's not me.
And they will say things like, it's not in the definition of a metaverse is essentially like an interoperable world that's persistently synchronous. So think of the real world that we live in right now, right? Like if I put on a backpack, get on a plane and take a plane to Amsterdam, when I arrive, I'm going to arrive with my backpack on. And if I had a scuffed shoe when I left, it'll still be scuffed when I got there. That's an interoperable, persistent, synchronous world, right? And that's what we have in the real world. We don't have that in the metaverse. You can't jump from virtual world to virtual world to virtual world with the same representation of yourself and have that outcome happen. But by the way, that may not be what people want inside of a immersive virtual experience anyway. They may want to embody themselves differently, but it's not persistent and interoperable. But here's an example I'll give to people around that. I think that hybrid work is not a great word. It's not because it makes me angry. It's just because I don't think it's, in its most common definition, a destination that we should want to arrive at. In other words, a structured approach where people go to the office 3 days a week, whether it makes sense to do it or not. That doesn't feel like a good final destination. And so for that reason, I don't like the term. But with respect to the metaverse, if I think we're striving for that interoperable, persistent, synchronous world. That is what we're trying to achieve in that domain. But I like the term because it's a future that I think is worth moving towards. Okay, so with respect to what we're doing, Chris Moeller and I, who some people who listen to this podcast will know, decided to go down the journey of creating an events series inside of a novel modality for doing that, right? Chris actually is the one that came up with the idea, so I'm going to give him full credit. He came to me and said, I've come up with this concept for a roundtable discussion series. I want to call it Inspired People, Inspired Places, and I want to talk about important issues on the future: work, education, community, well-being, and regenerative technology. He said, would you like to do that with me? If you're willing, like, come check out this virtual world that I'm doing it in. And together, what we hypothesized by doing it in this environment was a few things. We thought maybe we can earn people's attention better if we do it in a world that requires more of their attention to actually be part of. You know, they're going to have to build an avatar. They're going to have to use their keyboard and mouse, because this is not a virtual reality goggle thing, just to clarify. Like, this is a desktop software client that we're using to experience a virtual world. So they're going to have to navigate that environment. They're going to have to figure out how to emote and express how they're feeling with their avatars. They're going to have to figure out how to sit down in a virtual seat, et cetera, et cetera. These are friction points that people are going to have to be willing to experience and get comfortable with. They may even have to get permission from their employer to download such a software, because there's a lot of restrictions on that kind of thing. So can we get their attention better for an important conversation? Because that was really foundationally what we wanted to do. We wanted to talk about important things, like we're doing right now, just in a different modality, right? The second was, can we foster more psychological safety for every person that shows up? Because some people really don't feel comfortable in other modalities. Some people don't feel comfortable having a video-to-video conversation on Zoom like we're having right now. Lots of people don't feel comfortable in an in-person setting with a lot of the power dynamics that can inherently be there.
It sets some people free. It sets them free of that social anxiety, if you will.
Correct. And it ensures that we flatten those power dynamics and focus more on the conversation that's being had and the contributions that are being made. Is that something that we can facilitate? And then the third was, to me, people like being at like work is kind of not fun in a lot of instances. And like, is it just fun to go and experience a conversation in a new way? Yeah. And all of those theories and more have been proven true. We are using software that I hope will continue to evolve and become better. Whether that software ends up being capable of letting people represent themselves in ways that we can't even conceive of in the real world, or allows them to skeuomorph themselves in real life in a way where they feel more viscerally like themselves. And we did see that actually recently with Lex Friedman and Mark Zuckerberg, who just conducted a podcast in a very, very immersive photorealistic version of the metaverse. And it's incredible. For anybody who hasn't watched it, I highly recommend it. Lex Friedman is the podcast host, and he spoke with
I know him very well.
Yeah. So they
where's the suit?
Yeah, he's great. And use virtual reality goggles for that. But we're choosing something that we think is more accessible to people today to try to experience. And like just a few other anecdotes that I've found to be really interesting. There's stuff about gathering in a virtual world. And then when I say, I mean virtual world, like explicitly, not Zoom, like virtual world where there are elements of like you can wave to people, you walk around, et cetera, that end up being more like real life. So I'll give you a perfect example. When we started our conversation series, we just left the doors to the room that we conduct the conversations in wide open. And people would go and sit down and nobody would talk. But then one day we're like, we should close these doors and force people to hang out in the hallway. And by doing that, everybody started talking to one another and relationships started to get built informally. And then we went into the room, people were already more enthused, more engaged, more connected to the conversation. And so like that's in and of itself a powerful reason to use virtual worlds for at least some percentage of the distributed gatherings that we have. So for me, I'm a really big believer that irrespective of someone's opinion on how immersive the technology is today or how much it feels like real life today, I believe actually that the tools we have available to us today can achieve things that are not possible through Zoom, can make people feel more psychologically safe, can level the playing field, hierarchically or from a power dynamic perspective. And I think that it's a useful tool to augment how we connect. By no means am I here to say that we should stop doing it on Zoom or we should stop doing it in person. I'm really simply here to say, with curiosity, we should spend more time in the future of the internet because immersive virtual experiences are going to be foundational to the future of the internet. And why would we not invest our time and energy in them today, if not to only see how the interplay of our human dynamics takes shape in them, so that from a human perspective, we can actually evolve that future together.
Well said, Dave. And we've come to our time, and that's a great way to end with, we'll add the link to your series when we post this podcast. I finish each podcast with gratitude. Over the last couple of years or whenever you showed up in my feed as a non-industry plant, as we found out today, I learned a lot from you before I met you. And today, in this 1 hour or less of talking to you, I learned a ton, not just about you, but about myself. And I'm very grateful for that. And I appreciate what you're doing out there. And I appreciate all the nice things you've had to say about me, because obviously I approach it from a very self-conscious perspective, as you probably learned throughout the course of this conversation. But I want to thank you for everything that you've done for the industry and everything that you've done for me personally.
Well, that means a lot, man. Thank you for all that.
So with that, I'm going to say his last name wrong one last time. That's David Cairns.
You did it. That was perfect.
Yeah. I'm Bob Mastichetti. This is Connected Conversations, and I'll see you on the interwebs. Take care.